Hey everybody, welcome back to Neckar Park. What you're looking at right now is something which I don't usually feature in my time-lapses, but what is one of the most important things to me when making parks. It's laying out a very rough sketch of what an area is going to look like, and trying out all the buildings, facades, the pathwork, and the rides to kind of get an idea of what you want to go for. And now this definitely won't be the final thing. All of the buildings which I'm placing right now will be replaced by actual buildings later on, but it's really a rough in-game sketch of what it's going to look like. Kind of like in Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, what many people would used to do is use the ground textures to mark down where buildings are going to be and where paths are gonna go, and then when you start building things, you kind of already have a guideline as to what you're going to build, so you don't get stuck with what should I build here, or start building things that in the end you don't really like and you have to start all over. It's really kind of like making an outline, just if you want to make a painting or a drawing of some sorts. And the reason I don't usually feature it is because it's not the most interesting aspect of the time-lapses. I might do it a bit more in the future, but in this case, to be very honest, I am just in very dire time problems, and I really kind of underestimated how much time I had left, and especially since I started making that palace, which ended up taking an entire day, I don't really have enough time to finish off this park in a manner which I would like to do so. So this is just about the last section of the park, which will be properly finished. Now about the way that this is laid out, it still has that really open feeling that the rest of the Dutch area already has. I wanted to get a row of facades behind the coaster to kind of really close it up and make it one large plaza, if you will, within the Dutch area, and have that sort of backdrop under, sort of as a background to the coaster as well, if you look from the main section of this part of the park. Now I did end up removing that little ride since it's really small, and it also caused the pirate ship to sort of go slightly out of bounds, because I will make the park map a little bit smaller. I'm trying to get a sort of square footprint in with this park, so it really does look like it would be laid out as a very small park with a lack of space would, which are very often just in a square layout, which is pretty much filled to the brim with all sorts of things. And for the longest time here, and that was really a painfully long time, I was fighting with the path system. It's not necessarily because I couldn't really find a way out of this, but because I wanted to get a really specific sort of round shape to this. A lot of this path layout in this part of the park is already in many circles, like there's a large circular path around the helix of the coaster right there. And many of the transitions also kind of flow that way, and I think it just looks nicest, so I wanted to do it again. And I found this sort of trick to get it to actually do that. So what you can see me doing on the left there is actually get a very large area of path without something in the middle by having a path go into the other direction. I'm waiting to see if I'm gonna do it again, but it doesn't look like it. But that's something which I wanted to use for quite a while there. You can do it by holding Z, because it just gives more smooth paths that sort of flow into each other and aren't as much separate paths that just, connect to each other. Because if it's a theme park, you really want to have as much of a open and plaza-like path layout as you want, which is one of the reasons why I haven't been a fan of this game's path system for a long time. It's a path system that really works very well, and it's really intuitive as well, but the problem is just that it's not very theme park-ish to me. Many theme parks have just paths flowing everywhere, where it's more like everything is path, except for the places that are planters, rides, and buildings. And with a path system like this, you almost always just get small paths that go everywhere instead of these large winding plazas that you want to have. But anyway, that's a bit of a topic that I've probably talked about a bit too much already. Going into the first houses, which is pretty much the rest of this video. I wanted to finish this entire facade and give every house their own unique Dutch gable, which makes this the first appearance of the very famous Dutch gable architecture. And yeah, I sort of wanted to make this quite round, so it shows off every gable as much as I could. and just have all of those unique sort of facades to get a real Dutch atmosphere into this part of the park. And the first one is just a really simple one. Although it still took a bit of trial and error to get it where I want it, it doesn't really have any decorative thing like stairs or a clock type of gable. It's just a roof with a slanted front, with a couple of windows and a bit of extra decorations, and that is just about it. The inspiration for many of these buildings is just all over the place. You can find many of these types of buildings throughout the Netherlands, and they all have nearly exactly the same kind of facade, which did make my job here, well, quite easy actually, since you can just find many references of what these facades look like, and you just see them copied over on many buildings in the Netherlands. So these are just the archetypes of building gables if you want. And the basic color scheme for these buildings is quite simple as well, just having the old bricks as the wall texture, and in nearly every house, well actually every house, using these concrete smaller pieces to make all of the details, all of the trims and pillars on the buildings, and again using some of the wood to make those trims come out a bit more. And this building was exceptionally handy actually, because when I was building it at first, it seemed like a really awkwardly empty building, especially with that front not having anything, but it turned out to be the perfect place to actually place the sign of the ride itself, which I think fits into the Dutch area quite nicely. I was originally going to place it in a Scandinavian area if that was going to come, but since it didn't come, a ship kind of fits the Dutch area as well, with their colonial history and everything like that. So getting that ship sign in there for the ride, since it is the ride entrance. And moving on to the next building, which is the all-white building. You don't see them as much, but you definitely see them in many city centers. These very large white buildings which just have classical details and maybe just a few sprinkles of more Dutch elements. But all things considered, it is quite a classical looking building, and it doesn't really have those very typical Dutch gables or anything like that. The only thing that it really has in common, as goes with all of these buildings, is that they are on like sort of the same range of heights. They aren't all the exact same height, since you never really see that in the Netherlands, but to sort of get an idea of an ensemble of these buildings, they are sort of in the same height class. Not one of these buildings is really small, and there's also not a building that's much larger than the rest. They all sort of fall into the same height, and they all sort of have the same width as well. This building is going to be a little bit wider since it has those pillars on the side, but they're all just 2 tiles wide. And as you can see, what does make this building look a bit more Dutch is having all of these white cross-frame windows. It is quite an open building with a lot of glass, and I did want to cover that up on the front a little bit by adding an awning and try to make one for there. But that doesn't really work out. There's nothing to really make an awning out of, at least not texture-wise. So I just went with the boring Chief Beef awnings, which doesn't really fit the building too much, and they're much smaller than I was hoping for. So I might come back to that at some point, but I don't think there's any way to make any kind of convincing awning, so it's probably not going to happen at any time. And just quickly finishing what would be, well yeah, I'm not really sure, just the cornice of the building. Just the top part, which comes out a little bit, on top of which I can build the pediment, the triangular classical sort of front of the building. For quite a while I was thinking that I could also go with a round top, which you do see on many buildings with very nice details and ornaments on them. But there was just no way that I could figure out how to make that, so I just went with the very simple option here. Just get a triangular top and try and fit all of these different details in there to at least get a bit of a sculptures that you see on these kinds of buildings. But instead of having some sort of interesting scene, I just ended up sinking parrots and pirates into the front, since that was just about everything that I could do here. So that finishes off the building with just a bit of foliage to make it look a bit more inviting than the large white area than it was, and have a quick roof. As for many of these roofs, I had them pre-made pretty much from all of the other buildings that I've already made, which is why they're separate buildings. I didn't want to make the roofs all over again, so I just put the already existing roofs on top of these buildings here. And this building has a gable which is copied from the gable of the restaurant, just to save time, and I suppose because I'm lazy. But it's a little bit different. I definitely wanted to get very different details and everything. A stepped gable is something which you do find quite a lot, and since I already had this made, it just seemed like a perfect place to just copy it and make a completely new building out of it with a different style on the side of the building. So the first thing that I tried to do here is get some pillars with these white layers of bacon, if you will, on the sides, which didn't really work out that well in the end. They turned out to be a lot more fat than I was hoping for, and they really came out way too much from the building. So I made some second pillars that kind of sink into the walls a little bit more and have a different white texture, with a white texture on the side of them instead of having all of those horizontal rings. And that should just finish off the bottom to top pilasters on this building. And that makes this quite a fancy building. Since this is the building right in the middle of this facade, or this row of buildings, it is the building which really gets most of the attention, which is like the most visible from pretty much every angle that you look at this row of buildings from. So it's the building where I wanted to put most of the detail, and you'll probably find at the end that the detail sort of gets less and less toward the edge, and the buildings on the sides of this row are just the most simple ones, and this is the tallest and the most detailed one. Just finishing off the windows, same thing as always, white frames and a bit of decoration on top of it, as well as on the pillars connecting it to those horizontal things. Should just about finish off most of the details of this building. I was thinking about the door for quite a while though. There weren't really as easy ways to do the door of this building. Many of the other decorations are just keep adding stuff until it looks good, which pretty much worked for quite a while there. But especially since there aren't too many doors, and I definitely wanted all the doors to be square, I had to sink loads of different objects into the doors of these buildings to actually get some larger square doors with white decorations around them, which you don't really see in the game itself. And a few planters should finish that off quite nicely, because, well, a bit of foliage around the building always makes it look nicer. And moving on to the second to last building, which is going to be another unique gable. And I haven't been able to find an English translation for this, so if anybody knows about it, please let me know, because I've been looking for it but couldn't really find anything. Basically, in Dutch, literally translated, this would be called a neck gable, which sounds really weird. But it's a gable type where the middle part of the bricks comes out a lot higher, as you can see, and around that you have a lot of lighter detail to accent it. So in this case I'm adding some of these details and round shapes on the side of it, and on top of it there is that white peak sort of coming up, and that basically finishes off this gable. It looks a bit similar to the clock gable, which is one which I didn't feature in here, because it was just really hard to make, since it has a lot of round shapes that I couldn't really figure out how to make without extending far beyond it and not being able to get a proper roof in. So I ended up not going with that one, but a gable like this seems a bit more doable in the game, which is why I ended up going for this. The only, well, small mistake that I made with this building was that after I made this door and this window, I did figure that the top of the building is a little bit too tall. It is a 2-floor building and one of the smallest of this row of houses. But in the end, the second floor over here is just way too high, so I had to lower that a little bit. That aside though, it's pretty much the same, and you can already kind of tell the drill. Many of these Dutch houses are very similar, and the one sort of distinguishing feature in many cases is either just the texture of the walls, or what type of gable it has, because that really makes most of the difference for these buildings. There are also many Dutch buildings without a gable, which usually they have a hip roof, and that's, well, the exact reason why I didn't want to have a house without a gable on this building, because it's really hard to make a hip roof out of these doors. It might be possible, but I was feeling a bit too lazy to even try that, so I ended up just having these gables on all of the buildings. Now the last building, and I was also kind of lazy with this one, I have to say, is almost a copy of the first building. It is completely remade from scratch though, but it's also a little bit taller. I still needed toilets around here, so this is going to be the toilet building. I was originally planning to have the middle building as a toilet building, but I kept forgetting that I had to place toilets, so this eventually became the toilet building, which is not too bad. It might in hindsight just be better to have the toilet building on the side, so you don't really have that awkward large opening into the walls on what is the center of this row of facades. So this building ended up becoming where the toilets are at. And I'm not really sure what I'm gonna add to the side of this building. My original plan is to have a windmill there, but whether I'm going to add that windmill on that bunch of brick roofs all just depends on whether I have enough time to do it, and if that leaves me enough time to finish the rest of the area as well, which I'm not really sure. But this should at least finish off the row of facades quite nicely, so if all else fails and I don't really have enough time to finish this part of the park off proper, at the very least, the important facades are all done, and I can just start filling in the rest of this park with some foliage and things like that. And that finishes off the video for today, so thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time, in which I'll hopefully finish the park and see how far we get with that.